Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about Russia's income from the sale of military equipment. Now, defence spending is huge business. In 2023 alone, over $2.4 trillion was spent on defence. And Russia, prior to its invasion of Ukraine, was the second largest supplier of that equipment. However, because of its invasion of Ukraine, it's now fallen down the rankings, partly as a result of the sanctions that have been applied against it, and partly as a result of the relatively poor performance of Russian equipment in Ukraine. So in today's video, I'll have a look at the statistics for military spending in 2023 globally. We'll look at which countries are spending the most. We'll then have a look at which countries are the biggest exporters of military equipment, which countries are paying the most for imports, and then specifically we'll have a look at what's happened to Russia over the past few years, and we'll talk about the huge fall in income that Russia has experienced as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. And then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is happening globally right now with military spending, and what the impact of the loss of sales on the Russian economy will be. Now, before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, NordVPN, who are offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive deal that you can access by clicking in the link below. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that I personally have been a victim of cybercrime. This channel was taken over by crypto criminals, and the way that that happened was I was sent a link which I clicked into, and that link contained malware, and that meant that the hackers had access to my computer and basically changed all of my passwords and personal details. And if I'd have been using NordVPN at that point, it would never have happened, because NordVPN contains a unique feature called Threat Protection Pro, which would have prevented me from being hit by that malware attack. So NordVPN is fantastic for protecting you every single time you go online and making sure all of your data remains secure. But it also opens up a world of opportunity for you, because it enables you to access data and information and TV shows and movies and sports matches in regions that you may be geo-blocked from. You can change your location and access all of that entertainment. So as I mentioned, NordVPN is offering a special deal for Joe Blogs viewers, which you can access by clicking in the link below. And the great news is that it offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not happy, you can get your money back within the first 30 days. This graph shows the movement in world military expenditure between 1988 and 2023. And the scale on the left-hand side of this chart is shown in billions of US dollars and goes from zero at the bottom to $2.5 trillion at the top. And in terms of the colour coordination, the green section at the bottom represents North and South America. The grey section above it is Asia and Oceania. The pink section is Europe. The lilac section is the Middle East, and the purple section at the top is Africa. And the reason why there's no bar showing for 1991 is that no data was provided for the Soviet Union in that year, because that was the year that it was broken up. In the 10 years between 1988 and 1998, which was around the time when the Cold War finally came to an end, when we saw the breakup of the Soviet Union, the total amount of military expenditure fell in every single year and reduced from around $1.7 trillion to around 1.2. Now, as you can see, 1988 represented the low point in terms of military expenditure. And over the past 25 years, we've seen a steady increase in military expenditure. There was a slight decrease in 2013 and 2014. However, over the last 9 years, there has been a progressive increase in every single year. And if you look at the column for 2023, you can see that there's been a pronounced increase to the latest total of $2.443 trillion, which actually represents a 6.8% increase against the figures for 2022. Average military expenditure as a share of total government expenditure rose by 0.4 percentage points to 6.9% in 2023, and world military spending per person was the highest since 1990 at $306. The rise in global military spending in 23 can be attributed primarily to the ongoing war in Ukraine and escalating geopolitical tensions in Asia and Oceania and the Middle East. Military expenditure went up in all 5 geographical regions shown on this chart, with major spending increases recorded in Europe, Asia and Oceania, and the Middle East. This chart shows the percentage change in military expenditure in 2023 compared with 2022 for 13 different sub-regions of the globe. Now, right at the top here, you can see that military expenditure increased by 6.8% globally, but there were really big differences in terms of the amount that was spent by different regions. The largest of all of these was North Africa, which saw a 38% increase. And the 2 biggest spenders in this region were Algeria and Morocco, who together accounted for 82% of all military expenditure in North Africa in 2023, with Algeria's military spending increasing by 76% to $18.3 billion. Not surprisingly, the second biggest increase of 31% was in Eastern Europe, with the majority of this growth relating to the ongoing war in Ukraine. And Ukraine became the world's 8th biggest military spender in 2023, when it saw a 51% increase to $64.8 billion, which interestingly equated to around 59% of Russia's military spending in 2023. The third biggest increase of 10% was in Central and Western Europe, where total expenditure increased to $407 billion, which represented a 43% increase from the figures for 2014. The fourth biggest increase of 9% was seen in the Middle East, and this was the single biggest increase that's been seen in the past 10 years. Not surprisingly, the country in the Middle East that increased its expenditure the most was Israel, where it increased by 24% to $27.5 billion. And the fifth largest increase of 8.9% was seen in sub-Saharan Africa. And this increase was driven by a 20% rise in spending by Nigeria, and notable increases in several other countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. Now, I think the other thing that's notable about this chart is that the increase in North America was only 2.4%. However, obviously the USA and Canada have been providing significant amounts of aid to Ukraine to support it in its defence against Russia. And those numbers are included in the Eastern Europe figures here rather than in the North America figures. So overall, the USA is increasing its investment into military equipment. However, a lot of that military equipment is ending up in Eastern Europe. This chart shows the 15 countries with the highest military expenditure in 2023. And as you can see, the 2 largest spenders by far are the United States and China, which together account for around 50% of total military spending. Russia was the 3rd largest spender on military expenditure in 2023, followed by India, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, Germany, Ukraine, France, Japan, South Korea, Italy, Australia, Poland, and Israel. And the top 10 countries account for almost 3/4 of all military expenditure. In 2023, US military expenditure was $916 billion, which represented an increase of almost 10% against the same figures for 2014. The USA remains as the world's largest spender, allocating 3.1 times more to the military than the second largest spender, China. The biggest percentage increase among all US military spending categories in 23 was for research, development, test, and evaluation. The USA spent 9.4% more in real terms on this part of its expenditure than it did in 2022. And it's prioritised the development of defence systems in relative terms over other military spending categories since 2014, which aligns with its decision to shift focus away from counter-insurgency operations and asymmetric warfare to developing new weapon systems that could be used in potential conflict with adversaries with advanced military capabilities. China, the world's second largest military spender, allocated an estimated $296 billion to the military in 23, an increase of 6% against 2022. China's military expenditure has risen consecutively for 29 years, the longest unbroken streak recorded by any country. However, the rate of military spending growth has slowed over the past 10 years. Russia was estimated to have spent $109 billion on military expenditure in 2023, which was 24% higher than the figure for 22 and 57% higher than its figure for 2014, when it annexed Crimea. In 2023, Russia's military spending was 16% of total government expenditure, which were the highest levels recorded by Russia since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. India was the world's fourth largest spender on military expenditure in 2023, investing $83.6 billion, which was up 4.2% from the same figure for 2022 and 44% against the figures for 2014. The increase in India's military spending was mainly as a result of growing personnel and operational costs, which made up almost 80% of the total military budget. This aligns with the government's priority to strengthen the operational readiness of the armed forces amid ongoing tensions with China and Pakistan. In comparison, capital outlays to fund military procurement remained relatively stable at around 22% of the budget. Saudi Arabia was the world's fifth largest military spender in 23, investing $75.8 billion, which represented an increase of 4.3% against the figures for 2022. This map shows military spending as a percentage of gross domestic product around the world, and the key on the left-hand side here shows the colour coding for countries, and what this indicates is that the darker the colour, the higher the percentage of GDP. And if we have a look at the top 10 countries, the country that spent the most in 2023 in terms of percentage of GDP was Ukraine, where the figure came in at 37%. The second highest was the Lebanon at 8.9%, followed by Algeria at 8.2%, Saudi Arabia 7.1%, South Sudan 6.3%, Russia 5.9%, Armenia 5.5%, Oman 5.4%, Israel 5.3%, and Jordan 4.9%. This chart shows the global share of exports of major arms for the top 10 exporters in the period between 2019 and 2023. What this shows is that over the past 5 years, the USA is by far the world's largest supplier of arms. Over the past 5 years, the USA's share of the global export market for arms has increased from 34% to 42%. The USA delivered arms to 107 different countries over this period, and the volume of arms exported was 282% higher than that of the second largest exporter, France. The largest share of US arms, representing 38%, went to states in the Middle East, with the largest buyers being Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and Israel. 31% of the US exports went to Asia and Oceania, with the three biggest buyers being Japan, Australia, and South Korea. And US exports to Europe represented 28%. This chart shows the percentage change in the volume of exports of major arms between 2019 and 2023 compared with the previous 5 years. As we've just discussed, the United States saw a 17% increase, but the most notable thing about this chart is the change in the exports for France and Russia. France exported arms to 64 countries, with the largest recipient being India, representing 29% of all French exports. And as a result of that increase, it overtook Russia as the world's second largest exporter of arms. Russia's arms exports have fallen by 53% over the past 5 years, with the number of countries purchasing Russian arms falling from 31 to 12 over this period. And we'll come on to talk about what's happened to the Russian arms industry in more detail later in the video. This chart shows the countries that were the top 10 importers of major arms in the period between 2019 and 2023. At the top of this list is India, which represented 9.8% of total global spending, followed by Saudi Arabia at 8.4%, Qatar at 7.6%, Ukraine 4.9%, Pakistan 4.3%, Japan 4.1%, Egypt 4%, Australia 3.7%, South Korea 3.1%, and China 2.9%. India's tensions with Pakistan and China has largely driven its arms imports, which increased by 4.7% compared with the previous 5 years. In the period between 2009 and 2013, Russia was the main supplier of arms to India, providing 76%. However, this percentage has now fallen to 36%, and India is now looking to both Western suppliers, notably France and the USA, as well as developing its own industry to meet demands. Saudi Arabia is the world's second largest arms importer, and over the past 5 years, the USA has supplied 75% of all Saudi Arabian arms. Qatar is the world's third largest importer, and over the past 5 years, the USA provided 45% of Qatari arm imports France provided 25% and Italy 15%. This chart shows the buyers of Russian arms between 2020 and 2023. And the scale at the bottom of this chart is TIV, which measures the transfer of military capability rather than the financial value of those arms. And the 4 different coloured sections here relate to the different years. So the blue section is 2020, the black section 2021, the grey section 2022, and the red section 2023. And what you can see here is that over the past 4 years, India has been Russia's largest buyer of arms. However, in 2023, the red section on the right-hand side, India's purchases significantly reduced. The total purchases were around 1/3 of what they had been in each of the previous years. China has been Russia's second largest customer. However, the sales in 2023 were also down significantly against the figures for 2022. Algeria was the third largest purchaser, but there was also a significant reduction in 2023 in terms of the amount of arms it bought from Russia. Kazakhstan was the fourth largest customer, and it also cut back its purchases in 2023, as did Belarus, the fifth largest purchaser. Over the past 4 years, Egypt has been the fourth largest purchaser. However, it stopped making purchases in 2020. You can see that there's only a blue section here. There isn't a black, grey or red one. Myanmar was the next largest purchaser. However, the next 3 countries, Libya, Serbia and Vietnam, have all stopped their purchases from Russia. Mali is the next on the list and made a very small purchase in 2023. Uzbekistan, Syria and the United Arab Emirates did not buy anything in 2023. Pakistan made a small purchase, and Turkey also didn't buy anything last year. And if you take a step back and look at this chart overall, you can see that the red sections are, generally speaking, the smallest sections where countries have been buying in 2023, but many of the previous buyers from Russian arms did not make any purchases last year. As we saw earlier in the video, over the past 5 years, Russia has seen a 53% fall in its volume of arms exported, and it's now lost its position as the world's second largest exporter of arms to France. And this chart provides a detailed breakdown of Russia's position in the world's arms export market between 2010 and 2023. What this shows is that back in 2010, Russia held a 27% market share in the export of arms. That percentage increase has fallen progressively over the past 14 years and was down to 20% for the period between 2016 and 2020. However, over the past 5 years, there has been a rapid decline in Russia's market share, falling to 19% for 2017 to 21, 16% for 2018 to 2022, and the most recent figures show that its market share is down to 11%, which is 16 percentage points lower than it was in the 2010 to 2014 period. And this represents a complete collapse of Russia's market share. And the reasons for this are twofold. Firstly, Russia has lost its relationship with a lot of countries that were previously buying arms directly from it as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. And secondly, there are question marks over the performance of Russian equipment. When the invasion of Ukraine commenced, it was reported that Russia believed that the war would be over within a matter of days. However, almost 2.5 years later, it is still going on, and there have been lots of reports of failures of Russian equipment. And those failures have raised questions amongst Russia's previous buyers as to whether or not they should continue buying that equipment. And this reduction in market share obviously has a huge financial implication for Russia. In 2023, the total export market for arms was estimated to be $140 billion. So a loss of 16 percentage points of that market would equate to a loss of $22 billion from Russia's perspective, which is obviously seriously bad news for the Russian economy. But there are also additional implications, because the fact that Russia was one of the world's largest exporters of arms meant that it was able to invest huge amounts into its defence industry. It knew that it was going to get those sales, and so it could invest the capital up front and then recoup all of the profits at the back end. However, when you have falling market share, and therefore you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to achieve any of those sales, that means that you won't be able to recoup all of that capital investment, and so it will have to come from the Kremlin, from the Russian state. And this is therefore adding additional pressure onto the Russian budget, because rather than getting other countries to part fund its research and development and investment into equipment, it's now having to do it all itself. And that declining market share means that Russia is losing its cutting edge at the forefront of military equipment and arms development. And that's obviously bad news when you're involved in a war. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with defence spending is a really interesting topic. And in 2023, we saw defence spending increase globally for the 9th consecutive year. And it was estimated that total spending was around $2.4 trillion, which equates to around 2.3% of global GDP. These are really big numbers. And the reason why defence spending is continuing to increase is because there are rising concerns about global security. In 2023, we saw a continuation of the war in Ukraine. That's been going on since February 2022, and it's still going on right now. So over 2 years, heading towards 2.5 years very, very rapidly. And we also saw conflicts occurring in places like Syria, and we had the conflict in Israel. So there is a lot of tension globally. And as a result of that, many countries are increasing their defence spending. And that's obviously good news if you're an exporter, because not every country in the world produces its own arms. This is a highly specialised industry, and historically the two biggest players were the USA and Russia. But what we've seen from today's data is that over the past few years, Russia has started to lose its position as a global supplier of arms. It's actually providing arms to around 50% of the countries that it was around 5 years ago. And the USA has taken up the vast majority of that slack. Over the past 5 years, the USA's global market share has increased by 8 percentage points to 42%, and Russia's has fallen by 10% to 11%. And obviously that's seriously bad news from Russia's perspective. Firstly, there's the economic impact. The export market for arms in 2023 was estimated to be worth around $140 billion. And so the loss of a 10% market share, from Russia's point of view, equates to around $14 billion worth of income per year that Russia is losing out on. So obviously that's seriously bad news for the Russian economy, particularly at the moment when it needs as much cash as possible, because it's having to keep dipping into its reserves to keep funding the war in Ukraine. But the impact on Russia isn't just limited to the financial implications. There are also implications in terms of its own development of military equipment and defence. Because one of the things that you benefit from if you're a producer and exporter of arms is that you have a large amount of capital to continue investing into research and development. So you can keep creating more and more advanced weaponry using other people's money, because they're buying it from you, they're placing advanced orders, and so you get that cash in. You can keep reinvesting into all of your people, your defence sector, and keep developing things to stay at the cutting edge. But when your export market is falling, if you don't have as many buyers, then therefore you won't have as much capital. And this is like any business. If you don't keep reinvesting into it, you won't stay at the cutting edge. And that's what's happening to Russia right now. Over the past 5 years or so, there has been a market shift towards the USA. So the USA has got lots of buyers, lots of capital, and it's continuing to develop all of its weapons. Russia is now having to fund its own research and development and keep things going from its internal resources. And obviously right now, its internal resources are stretched. So the overall summary of today's video is that defence spending globally continues to rise. That rise in spending is fueled by concerns about global peace and more wars potentially breaking out. Countries want to make sure that they are ready if something disastrous does happen. However, over the past 5 years, what we've seen is a global shift. The USA is benefiting from the negative impact of the war in Ukraine. Russia is suffering. It's lost its position as the second largest supplier of arms globally to France. And that means that its revenue is going down, which means that Russia now has less capital to continue investing into its defence sector. It's going to have to fund it from its own resources. That's going to put additional pressure on the Russian resources, and at some point, if Russia doesn't end this war, its reserves could certainly run out. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face. I've got some really exciting news for you. I've decided to give away another one of my sculptures, and it's this piece, which is called Windswept Clock, because it's actually got a fully functioning clock built into it, and it's by a British artist called Paul Margetts, who I've got a lot of different pieces from, and I think this is absolutely fantastic. It's really heavy. This would look amazing in anybody's place. And you can win this by entering into the prize draw, and the tickets are priced at only £1 each, which is around $1.30. So if you want to support the channel, rather than buying me a coffee or sending me a YouTube super thanks, why don't you buy a ticket and you could win this thing, and you can follow on from the previous winners like Craig in Australia, who won the little red balloon dog, and Lars from the Netherlands, who won Stiltman. And there is a potential, if you do win, that you may have to pay some import duty. I don't think Craig or Lars did, so maybe you won't. And I'm getting an independent company to organise everything for me, so it's all above board. I won't be involved in drawing the winner. That's entirely at random. But if you'd like to win this, an original Joe Bloggs sculpture, you can't buy these things, you can only win them, then have a look at the details below and buy a ticket, and good luck.